Welcome to the Bright Insight Digital Health C-Suite Series. I'm Chitra Nawbatt. Joining us today is Elisabethann Wright with Cooley. Elisabethann, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You've specialized in EU law and regulation for pharmaceuticals and medical devices for almost 40 years. Tell us about your areas of focus.
So my areas of focus are, from an EU perspective, a fairly unusual practice, but one we all love, which is determining what is the product you have. Is it a pharmaceutical product? Is it a medical device? Is it a lab product? Is it a food product? Is it a cosmetic product? We have to start with what is the product, because these are such highly regulated areas in the EU. So we start with determine your product, then determine how to get it to market. What regulations must you follow? You've got to follow the law. Medical devices, pharma products, commonly considered to be essentially risky products. They have potential risks to patients, so they're highly regulated. They must follow the regulation to get the product on the market. We help them to conduct clinical trials, interact with authorities, interact with notified bodies, get a medical device CE mark, get a pharmaceutical product authorized, and then after authorization, how to promote it, how to market it. In the EU, pharmaceutical products, particularly prescription-only medicinal products, it's an offence to promote a prescription-only medicinal product to a non-healthcare professional in the EU, which for many of our clients from outside the EU is a challenge.
So given that you're at this intersection where you're seeing innovation and everything happening at large companies, mid companies, startups in pharmaceuticals and in medical devices, what's the top trend in pharmaceuticals that is creating regulatory issues?
So for the pharmaceutical sector, it is probably the entry into force of the clinical trials regulation, which will govern all clinical trials from the 31st of January, the end of this month. All clinical trials must be conducted in accordance with the regulation. Now, it is not a simple regulation. It is complicated. It introduces new provisions. Well, there are a fair number of guidance documents prepared, but it is different to what we're used to. We had a relatively simple procedure before. Now we've got a new one. And it is important for clinical trials to follow this regulation to ensure that not just that the trial is conducted properly, but the results are acceptable.
And the biggest difference is?
The obligations are much more sophisticated. We have a central first step authorization. A single reference member state will review the application. Concerned member states will then review it. You will get a single first authorization for the procedural parts. Then you go to the national member states and you will get individual authorization. So you start with a global authorization, which we never had before, which should be helpful, but is not at all what people are used to in clinical trials.
And on the medical device side?
So much going on the medical device side. First of all, we have the medical device legislation completely changed in the last 2 years. On Friday, the European Commission published new revisions to our new legislation, proposals to extend the transitional provisions in both medical device legislation and in vitro diagnostics. There are very varying views on that. Some people think, oh, well, we just can't do anything else. This is great. Other device manufacturers say, hang on, we've known about this legislation for 4 or 5 years. Why are you telling us that that other people are getting a benefit over us? So there's a lot of opinions on that. But we also have more legislation coming in, particularly on AI. We have the AI regulation coming in, which will be, the intention is to administer generally AI, not just for medical devices, but AI in general. It's, I think, the closest thing we can call it, it's a similarity to the electromagnetic compatibility legislation. Now, there is concerns that there will be conflicts between the AI legislation and the medical device legislation. I honestly am not sure that the institutions would do that.
If you could maybe bring this to life, though, for us with an example of how it actually sort of plays out from a business perspective, from an operational perspective, if you're a company in this space.
So you're a company that has AI technology. You are creating a platform. Is your platform a medical device? Is it a partial medical device? Or are medical devices installed on the platform? Whichever way you do that, you have to follow the rules. Next question, what rules? Well, you will have the medical device legislation. It's very clear, it has been for quite a number of years. AI, software as a standalone medical device, must be governed by the medical device legislation. But there are additional types of legislation that are coming in, and this is the AI legislation. It is a real technical legislation. The standards that must be applied to all AI, not just AI for medical devices. And so you've got an additional layer of obligations. Document what you're doing. Always advise. If you're doing something, particularly as this legislation is evolving, and we saw this with the medical device rules as well, if you're developing product and the legislation is not necessarily keeping up with you, if you decide to pursue a particular route, document it. That way, if in the future someone says, well, why did you do it that way? These are the standards, this is what we followed, this is why we thought it was the right thing to do.
So if you're, how do you solve for this, right? Whether it's a large company having internal processes or partnering with digital health startups like Bright Insight or others, what are the ingredients that you need, people, process, systems, to solve for this, to get ahead of this if you can?
The fundamental, always, you've got to have a quality management system. You've got to document what your quality management system is. You've got to demonstrate how you got to where you were. If you have a substantive large company engaging with a small company, both companies need to understand what they're doing. They must have a good, detailed, written agreement that both understand what is expected of them, what is expected of the other party, and unfortunately, looking at it from a lawyer's perspective, what happens if it goes wrong.
Digital health entrepreneurs, and you talked a little bit about this earlier at the top around building product and taking them to market. Digital health entrepreneurs in pharma and medical devices, they're innovating faster than regulation can keep up. What are best practices for entrepreneurs to follow to navigate or avoid that chicken and egg situation?
So I guess there are two steps. The first is, as an example, we have the clinical trials regulation. It entered into force in 2014. It was adopted in 2014. It will enter into application in a practical standard on the 31st of January 2023. That's a long time. And in the meantime, other legislation has been adopted in the same area. So this is the clinical trials legislation, which includes a provision which says sponsors may ask patients if they can use their data in the future. The GDPR on data privacy specifically excludes that possibility. But the GDPR was adopted in 2016. It entered into force before the clinical trials regulation came into force, so we now have potential conflicts of laws. You need to address that. If you don't address it, you could undermine the results of your clinical trial. Nobody wants that. Documentation. If you have, to give an example, you've got a continuous glucose monitor, you've got an insulin pump. They talk to each other. An AI platform quite often. So if the continuous glucose monitor is a medical device. The insulin pump is a drug delivery system governed largely by the pharma rules. The pump, the monitor by the device rules, but they need to talk to each other. They talk to each other through AI. A third party, normally, developing the AI offering. They need to agree what they're talking about. They need to know the technical platform on which they are talking. They need to understand what each is bringing to the table, the expectations in writing in some detail, and in the misfortune that something goes wrong, how do they determine what goes wrong? Let's not start pointing the finger first. Let's start with, if we got an issue, what crisis management procedures have we in place? Who does what, when, where, who reports? Having a good, robust structure in place demonstrates protection of the patient, protection of the products, demonstration to the authorities, you know what you're doing, and then, of course, any liability that may arise.
Elisabethann, final question. What's the digital health trend that will dominate market opportunity this year?
I think the most likely is going to be two. The first is this, the communication between devices and medical device and pharma. Also the diagnostics, software as a diagnostic. Because until now in the EU, we did not have specific legislation on companion diagnostics. We do have that now. It is, personally, I welcome it because it is what we really needed. And companion diagnostics brings so much to the treatment of patients. Personally, I'm very fond of this area. And it is important that those who are developing these companion diagnostics follow the rules. You've got to get it right. You have a patient's life here, and you risk serious consequences if you don't.
Elisabethann, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.